So hi, and welcome to a chat with Jean Lapper, Democratic candidate running against Dan Steck to represent District 45 in the New York State Senate. I'm Jared Stam, editor with NYVT Media. I'm joined today by Jean, of course, by Doug LaRock and Kate Duso, our reporters, and we're pleased to be sitting down in our offices to talk about some of the issues and talk about you, Jean. So let's just get started. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, thanks Jared. Thanks for giving me an opportunity to introduce myself as well as talk about my campaign. So my name is Jean Lapper. I'm from Queensbury, where I've lived for the past 37 years. I raised my two daughters there, where they went to school at the Queensbury Union Free School District. And I'm a CPA. I'm a small business owner. I have my own accounting practice in Glens Falls. And I've been a long-time community leader where I've taken many positions and have been active in my local Rotary Club. I've filled in as executive director of the Tri-County United Way, as well as been on the boards of things like the Fort Hudson and Family Services Association. So I've had a broad depth of experience in the community, as well as a good understanding of seeing what goes on in the community, both through my volunteer work as well as through the small businesses that I service and represent in my accounting practice.
Get right down to it. The last few years, being a public office holder can sometimes be viewed in negative light by a lot of people. So why jump into the political fray?
Well, I feel like right now our rights and our opportunities are under attack, and so I felt like now was the time to jump into the race and get involved.
Almost every poll out there says the economy is the most important issue on people's minds this year, with rising costs, sometimes dramatically, and associated with supply chain issues. Do you agree? And if you do, how can we fix it?
So yes, I agree that the economy is a big challenge. Okay, I see it in my home. I see it with all of my clients. I was having a discussion this morning with a seasonal business who was able to tell me, yeah, their income was up, their gross income, but so were their expenses. So it's been a real challenge. It's been a real challenge to find workers. So productivity is a big issue today, as well as supply chain. A lot of economic policy really happens at the federal level, not at the state level. But one of the things that we can do that will tie into one of my other priorities, which is the environment, is a good job is the best insurance against inflation. Okay, where people have good paying jobs, have proper benefits, that's really the best way to ward against inflation. The rest of it requires much bigger policy than what we can do at the state level.
There's just to talk about so-called red wave this year, with more Republican political victories than Democratic, because of the economy and also because with an off year, the election tends to favor the party that's not in the White House. Do you see this happening?
Well, I don't see it happening locally.
Yeah.
I see happening, what I've seen as I get out and speak with people, it's more about the messaging. So my priorities are protecting reproductive rights and reproductive health care, as well as protecting the environment, investing in small business, and finishing out the broadband project that we've been working on for a very long time. And these are all resonating well with people, so it's about the message. What I've found as I've traveled all 6 counties in the district is that there are a lot of very independent-minded voters who are really in the middle, and they want to make sure that their needs are being addressed. And I've been going door to door. I've been introducing myself, then listening to what's on their minds, and people want to be heard. So that I'm finding that that's the most important thing right now, and I do find that there's a lot of energy around women who feel like their rights are being taken away from them. Rights that many of us maybe took for granted for a long time.
I'm going to follow up on that point. A friend of mine said not too long ago that he supported the Supreme Court decision on Roe versus Wade, but why did they do it then? Because he feels it gives a lot of fodder to the Democratic Party. and favorable to the Republican Party. Generally, most Republicans being pro-life. Do you agree that it kind of re-energized the Democratic Party, the decision?
Absolutely. I think it re-energized Democrats. I think it re-energized Republicans. I think it re-energized women that are in their reproductive years. I think it's energized men who love those women who are in their childbearing years, because reproductive health is a serious health consideration. It's not just about abortion. It's not just about contraception. It's about all of it. I mean, myself, I've experienced numerous miscarriages, one of which was life-threatening at 16 weeks of pregnancy. And if I didn't have the care available to me at Glens Falls Hospital that I needed at that time, I wouldn't be here, and neither would my 23-year-old daughter. So that's what this is about. It's not an abstract idea. It's not an abstract, Supreme Court decision. This is about real life. It's about real life for women. And it's about real life for me. It's real life for my daughters, and it's real life for everyone today, for families.
The follow-up I had is already answered.
Let's go on.
On the theme of healthcare, access to healthcare in general areas of Washington County have become a problem, especially because they're so rural. For Whitehall specifically, they have a health van that comes twice a week. And what do you see as other options to increase the healthcare in rural areas? What is a tactic that we could do to help Washington County?
Sure. So, well, there's certainly a role that the state can play with providing funding for mobile clinics, as well as providing services at the schools, providing services at the county health centers. So these are things where the state can certainly support the rural needs. I think it's essential that we invest more in clinics and access to healthcare in the rural areas.
I'll switch topics on you.
Mm-hmm.
Gun violence, gun control, one of the hot button topics of this issue. Many urban areas in particular have seen a dramatic increase in both murders or gun-related violence. What's the answer? Is it tighter gun control? Is that part of the solution? Or is there another solution?
Well, I think the increase in crime, the current increase in crime, is it's more complex than that. Okay, we're coming out of COVID. We can't count how what an impact that had on people's access to mental health care, the stress of the economy, and all the things that create stresses that create more crime. So that's one of the things. I think right now, we had a new gun bill in the state. Prior to recent activity, New York State was considered one of the states with the lowest levels of gun crime in the country, and we have pretty strict rules around guns. And so it's important for us to keep everyday people safe while still, preserving the Second Amendment. I think what's happening right now, we're not seeing these increases in crime in our area. I think it's just such a complex issue right now.
I'm going to follow up. And of course, when I wrote this question yesterday, the circumstances changed again last night.
Mm-hmm.
But a federal judge had ruled that New York's concealed carry law was partially unconstitutional.
Mm-hmm.
And then apparently a higher ranking federal judge last evening, and I'm not sure the legal jargon he used, but basically it was a stay on the stay.
Mm-hmm.
So that the law as enacted is back in place until the 3-judge appellate panel hears the case and makes a decision. We interviewed another Democratic candidate who did express a concern about this law, supported the law for the very most part, but felt when the US Supreme Court initially shot down New York's 100-year-old concealed carry weapon, that Governor Hochul may have knee-jerked on this, and that it wasn't thoroughly vetted enough to stand the test of unconstitutional challenges. Do you think she did?
Do I think she?
Do you think she knee-jerked on it?
I would say that we had there were two significant things at play at the time. One was that the law was thrown out by the Supreme Court. We also just had experienced 2 mass shootings in the country. And I think the response was we need to keep people safe. So yes, on one level, I applaud immediate action. Everybody complains that government moves too slowly, right? And then when government moves too quickly, they complain that they didn't do their homework. Okay, well, what I know as a CPA who works with the Internal Revenue Code and New York State tax law, every time there's a new tax law, passed, they have to go back, make corrections, and issue regulations to tell you how to implement the law. It happens every single time. I've been in this business a long time. It's the same with this gun law. I do think that there need to be some corrections. I think that we've seen locally issues with hunting in the Adirondacks. Clearly that was not intended, or that doesn't make sense to a reasonable person. I don't think we had anyone at the table saying, not with a finger pointed, but hey, you guys don't understand the Adirondacks, like we need to make sure this is accepted, all right, or exempted, or the reenactment. So instead of focusing on the purpose of reenactments this past summer, we were focusing on whether people could carry the muskets. Instead of worrying about keeping history alive and presenting the right message about our history, we were focused on the weapons that we used at the time. And so we, we're losing track of what the main mission is because of politics. And I'd like to see, let's bring back a little bit more rational thought, sit down, work through it. And yes, so I think there needs to be some corrections clearly, and I think we need to take the time to work through that.
I have one other follow-up on this, and I'm playing devil's advocate.
Sure.
The vast majority of the crimes that are committed with illegal handguns. And there are people that are legitimate gun owners that say, my weapon is secured, I'm not going out and committing crime. And they feel the new concealed carry law actually targets legal gun owners and doesn't do enough to get illegal guns off the street.
Well, I think we've been making efforts to try to get the illegal guns off the street. And I would, if I want to reverse that devil's advocate, is we've had pretty strict laws all this time. So we have, honest, law-abiding gun owners that clearly are not committing crimes, but the people who are getting the guns illegally are, committing the crimes. But that's based on what the law was. When you say someone illegally obtained a gun, that's based on what the law was. So that's almost telling me the opposite, that we should have kept in place what was already the law.
Thank you.
So staying with crime.
Okay.
Let's talk about bail reform. So opponents of the bail reform law said that it's just basically catch and release. And I know doing the police beat that we write every week, I sometimes see double and triple offenders who are arrested one day, released, arrested the next day, released. So it takes away judicial discretion, even in cases that are a very serious crime, and judges are having to release perpetrators. Do you agree this law is flawed, and what can we do to?
Yeah, I do agree that the law is flawed, and I do agree that it could use, again, some corrections.
Right.
And I think again we've lost sight of the purpose of bail was to keep dangerous people off the streets, to keep society safe. And what's happened over time is that bail has become a way to penalize poor people, and people who have more means are able to post the bail and get out. So it's not relative to the crime committed. It's relative more to what your financial ability is. So we need to, tighten up give more discretion to the judges, because clearly if someone has committed a dangerous crime or has been charged with a dangerous crime, we need to make sure that the public is is safe, and so there definitely needs to be some adjustments to the bail reform.
Just sort of a follow-on question to that too is, morale of police.
Sure.
We were talking with somebody who said that that's sort of a paramount concern. And what can be done, do you think, to improve the morale of the police forces who might be feeling that we're going out and doing our job and it's being undermined, by this law? Is there?
Sure. Well, I think, one of the things that I would like to see is that we bring all the stakeholders in. So the police, as well as the DAs, people representing the judges, and come up with what makes sense, what's a reasonable law. Okay, I personally have 4 generations of my family in law enforcement, from my grandfather now down to my niece and nephew. And so I clearly support the police. I support law enforcement. I want them to be safe. I want them to do a good job to keep me safe and to keep our communities safe. And I don't want to undermine their job. Okay, and unfortunately, we've taken all these sound bites and we've co-opted them. And instead of coming up with reasonable legislation, we're pitting law enforcement against average citizens, and that's we need to change that.
I'm gonna talk a little bit about population.
Okay.
In New York, it has been identified as one of the leading states when it comes to population loss. 40 years ago, it was one of the most populated states in the nation, and it now ranks 4th behind California, Texas, and Florida. What do we need to do to reverse that trend?
Good. Well, one of the reasons why I got in the race and why I do all the things that I do is, as I mentioned, I have 2 daughters that I raised in Queensbury, and they don't live in our area anymore. And I'd like them to have opportunity to come back. We need them. We need the next generation to come back. So some of the things that are going on right now, which I fully support, is the Environmental Bond Act, which is going to provide, a once-in-a-generation amount of funding for green jobs, for green infrastructure. It will deal with climate change issues, which are things that are really important to us today, but more important to the next generation. And I think New York State can be a leader in this area, and we can provide good paying jobs with benefits, so it'll entice people to come here. So I think that's really critical. I mean, last week we had announcements of the 2 different chip factories in New York State. I mean, New York State can be a leader. I mean, these are jobs that you just can't find anywhere. So I think these will encourage young people to move here. I think what I saw over COVID was that people came up to the small towns, the small villages. They went to the Adirondacks. They didn't realize how stunningly beautiful it is, how much fun it can be up here, how much there is available. And what wasn't available were jobs. And now if we have the jobs, whether it's a remote job or whether it's these new jobs and the new technologies and the new green areas, these are things that will entice people to go. That's why people left. And now we're doing, something that's a once-in-a-generation opportunity to bring people back.
I have a follow-up question as well for this. When you speak about green acts and the environment, I am interested to hear your opinion on the electric bus system for school districts. Governor Kathy Hochul in January in her State address spoke on the issue of wanting to change over buses from diesel vehicles to electric. What is your opinion on that?
I think it's a great idea. I think that we should convert our buses to electric buses. We actually have an electric bus manufacturer in the district up in Plattsburgh. So we're supporting our own local economy, as well as helping reduce the amount of emissions and fossil fuels that are being used.
Another follow-up to
Yeah.
the follow-up, sorry. I know that in rural areas like Whitehall, New York, there's taxpayers that are very concerned about the price it's going to cost them to switch over to the electric vehicles with the need of bus chargers, as well as some solar panels to bring an extra source of energy to the batteries. What is something that maybe they need to hear to calm those nerves, because
Absolutely.
it's very important to tax base, as well as the school district, and the planet.
Great. Well, what I would love to do, so one of the things that happened is this past year, there was record funding for education in the budget. And next year, I would like to also vote on record funding for the budget, for the school budget. Okay, the state is in a position to provide the funding for the infrastructure. So part of the Bond Act will provide money for infrastructure, but also providing, we can provide money through the, through education or energy, to provide the charging stations as well as the solar panels. And one of the things that can happen that is not happening right now is, as a senator, I can go and advocate specifically for the Whitehall schools. That is not happening right now. I've been in touch with people on the education committee, and what I've heard, and I've heard this from numerous elected officials, I've heard it from school superintendents, that when asking specifically for money for a specific project or a specific school, our current senator just won't even ask. He either throws his hands up and says, sorry, I'm not in the majority, or he just says, I can't help you with that. And when I talk to people on the education committee, they said, we help people all the time. It's about the kids, it's about the schools. It's not about whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, but in fact, your senator has never asked for money for your schools. So I want to be the one there who's saying Whitehall needs this.
And I also have the next question on the list. Sorry, it's turning into a conversation between us. Focusing back again on Whitehall, I'm the Whitehall Times reporter, so I have my nose kind of in all the corners up there. This past summer, there were over 10 water main breaks, and it's notorious in Whitehall to have water main issues. With your incline in environmental issues as well as water source and how it is one of the biggest commodities on the planet, can you tell me how you want to be able to help small communities like Whitehall with large infrastructure projects and help address these issues?
Sure. Perfect. That ties perfectly into the Environmental Bond Act. So I don't have the numbers in front of me, but a substantial amount of the money is for clean water and clean air infrastructure. And every municipality is challenged to come up with the money through their regular budgets and their normal tax base to update their water systems, for example. So the money is in there in the Environmental Bond Act, so I encourage everybody to vote for it. It'll be on the opposite, it'll be on the flip side of the ballot, so after they vote for Jean Lapper, they can flip over their ballot and vote for Prop 1 for the Environmental Bond Act, which will provide the money for water. So it's absolutely essential, especially in these older towns and villages where the infrastructure is 100 or more years old. We need to upgrade the systems both for clean water, clean air, for flooding, and other essential infrastructure that these small communities can't afford to do on their own.
I had just one other question. You talked
Sure.
earlier about internet.
Okay.
And we've just gone through, Hebron, I live in West Hebron, and we've just gone through a 4-year process of finally getting some viable broadband internet access. But I still know that there are so many areas that are either delayed or just not served at all, not even on the radar. And I know probably a lot of them are in this district. So,
Yes.
I mean, what's the solution to that? I mean, things are in process, but the process is taking such a long time.
Right, so the most underserved area in the state, if you look at the map, is this district, okay? It's primarily in the Adirondacks, up through Essex and lower Franklin County is, clearly we have mountains in the way, so that's an issue. But the directive has been there, the plan is there. I'm working out some details right now with some people that are in this business where they're, where we can't build everything out with fiber lines, which is what they did in Washington County, right? They brought in all these lines to connect people. Well, you're not gonna be able to do that up and down the mountains, right? So there needs to be a way to perhaps bring it in from satellite or, bring it from the top down. And so I'm working with some people right now about specifics about how we can bring that about, because it's essential. I've said over these last 4 months, driving the 6,800 square miles of the district. I mean, it's beautiful, it's fascinating, it's great to come to all the little towns and villages and learn more about them. On the other hand, there's a lot of downtime in between because you can't use your phone, you can't use your computer, because and you're just in a blackout for
Yeah.
peace, you know. So you look at the foliage or you
Yeah.
look at the mountains or the water. But yeah, it's essential. I mean, it's essential for business, it's essential for healthcare, it's essential for schools. You know, we heard a lot about during COVID that you know, kids who didn't have internet were sitting outside the library in their cars. Well, I saw that this summer. I saw parents, and someone pointed out, they said, you need to go over to the library in Warrensburg and see how many cars pull up at the end of the day because they don't have internet service. And either they don't have it or they can't afford it. So not only do we need to make it accessible, but we need to make it affordable for low-income people because it is essential, just like electricity at this point.
Yeah, do you consider it to be something that, a utility that would be
Absolutely.
regulated and, you know, as far as cost is concerned?
Yeah, as far as the cost goes, we need to be able to help people like we help people with their heat in the wintertime. And I think that's essential. And, you know, when you're talking about kids getting their education or, you know, we need the next generation to be able to do these next jobs. And New York State has very good schools. And we need to be able to educate our students and keep them here.
You're talking about your district, 6,800 square miles. And I could be wrong, but I think it's the biggest Senate district in the state geographically.
Yes.
That's gotta be challenging to represent that where you have so many miles between your communities, the problems with internet, etc., versus a Senate district in the city of Albany that basically is just the city of Albany and maybe a couple of the surrounding towns. How do you face that challenge?
Well, first of all, it is what it is. So we have to accept it as it is. And what I found as I travel about is that while every town and village and city and area has its own unique identity in many ways, there's certain things that are native to that area, whether it's a food or an event. But at the end of the day, what people are looking for the most part, are the same. The issues that I've pointed out are, you know, whether it's access to reproductive health care, whether it's internet service, whether it's protecting the environment or investing in small business, that's the same. So I think one of the things we have to do is come up with the right solutions and have a little bit more of a regional approach where different communities work with each other, because it's the only way to, you know, to get any kind of movement in the right direction. But on the other hand, you know, I've only been in the race since June, and I've been to every county at least 6 or 7 times, and what I find is, honestly, that in some ways it's also just like one big small town, because in that whole geographic area there are only about 320,000 people. And I was in Malone one day on a Saturday, and the next Wednesday I was in Plattsburgh, and I ran into 2 women who I don't know, they weren't connected to anything. I ran into them at the Panera, okay? And then I met women in Canton, and then I ran into them in Saranac Lake. And I met somebody in Tupper Lake, and then met them in Lake Placid. So it's happened 3 times just in my couple of months. And hey, I know you, like, and so especially as we go north of here, people travel more, they're more interconnected. They might live in one community, work in the other community. And so when people are more interconnected, you get that sense of community and how you can work between St. Lawrence County and Clinton County.
You've already touched on most, I think, of your main topics, but do you have any other priorities that we haven't spoken of you'd like to address?
Sure. Well, a big thing that's related to all of these issues is the lack of affordable housing in the area. It's particularly, it's a big problem where I live in Queensbury. It's a big problem in most of Essex County, Lake Placid, it's a big problem in Saranac Lake, and as we go north. So if we want workers, we want young people to stay here, we need families to have a good life, they need to be able to have affordable housing. So there's more housing that needs to be built, and we need to have the state come in and assist with that. And we're not talking about low-income housing, we're talking about housing for workers. We're talking about housing for teachers and nurses and construction workers, and that's a really important thing right now, because early on I talked about lack of productivity, and without people to do the work and then a place to live, we can't continue to move our economy forward. And the other thing related to that, which is just a personal issue to me, I'm not there anymore, but childcare, we need more childcare resources. I commented to a friend recently, sometime late last year, that my oldest daughter is 33, and it is no easier and no more affordable to get childcare today than it was 33 years ago. And in some ways, and it's harder, it's actually harder, there's less available. And that next week I had a client call and say he was coming over to go over his tax work, and he said, "Can I bring my little one? Because our daycare just closed." And he was on daddy duty because he's able to work at home and mom has to go to her job. So these are the kinds of things that are just everyday family issues, and again, I think the state can provide the resources to help childcare providers. They're way underpaid. It's a very important job. I know it was essential for me early in my career to have good, safe, affordable childcare, so that I felt like my child was safe when I went off to work every day, and it worked out for me, and I'd like to see the same thing for other young families.
Good. Great. Any other questions that we have for Jean Lapper?
I do.
Okay.
Oh, boy.
That's it.
So, as a small business owner yourself, what is a good tactic, or how do you think small businesses that lost their source of income at the beginning of the pandemic, how do they get back on their feet 2 years now passed since they've possibly closed their doors? I know small towns are dependent on revenue of business, and if business is closed, then the towns aren't having that sort of dough coming in to help them.
Sure, and they don't have the activity.
Yeah.
So it's a really broad question, so I'll tell you I have a different answer for my restaurant client versus a salon client or somebody in a professional practice. Right now there is actually seed money through New York State grants for people who did for just that reason, and I think it's up to $50,000. So I would first thing I would do is recommend looking into what programs are available like that and whether their business could qualify for it. I commend people who had to close the doors and then still want to start over again, because that is the nature of an entrepreneur, and that is part of what makes all our little small towns great, is all these small businesses that we can walk into and say hello, and the owner, and it makes your town feel alive. It's partly why I have lived in Glens Falls, Queensbury area for so long, is that access to people and that community feeling. So I would suggest that they do something like that. They might call an accountant or some other financial advisor and say, "Hey, can you help me out get started back online?" There's a lot of resources. They can go to their local chamber, seek out economic development. So there are a lot of resources that are available that you don't have to pay for. And that would be the first thing, is that, the one thing you have to know is you can't do it all alone. And that is the nature of what's happened, I think, after COVID, is people feel really isolated and alone. And the next step is that, you have to reach out and ask for the help, because it's definitely available.
That was all I had.
Good. Do you have any last things you'd like to say? Just any summing up?
Well, just want to remind people to vote on November 8th. Early voting starts October 29th. And like I said earlier, I think I have the right temperament to be sitting at the table down in Albany to get the needs met of this area. I'm not going down to fight with people. It's just I want to do the work. want to do the work of the position. I think it's only fair to the taxpayers and to the voters here that somebody is there on their behalf who understands how many tax dollars we send to Albany, that we want to make sure we get our share to come back here. And my main thing, you know, I also, like I said, I see our rights under attack, particularly women's rights, and I want to be there as a woman, as a mother of daughters, as someone who's just worked my whole career, you know, working for women. I think it's important that we all get out to vote.
Thank you so much. Thanks for taking time out of your schedule to be here today, and we really appreciate it.
Okay, thanks.
Luck.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone. Great questions.